The first time Giovanni and his crew saw Salvatore, they thought he was just another tourist. He was with a group of people in suits, taking pictures of the Colosseum. But when they got closer, they noticed something strange. All of Salvatore's fingers were cut off. Fingers are important to many things in life, especially if you're part of the Mafia. Losing them means you lost your honor. And if you're in the Mafia, that could mean you're dead. When the men finally realized who Salvatore was, they quickly apologized for their rudeness. They knew who he was, and they knew what had happened to him. Salvatore, the former capo mandamento of the Genovese family, was in Rome for one reason: revenge. His entire family had been murdered by the rival Bonanno crime family, and now he wants payback. This is Mafia, the untold story of the blood war between two families. Welcome back to the channel. Today we'll look at the bloody feud between the Bonanno and Genovese crime families in 1960s New York. You won't want to miss this. In the early 1960s, New York was a dangerous place. The city was ruled by 5 different crime families. At the time, there was no war between these families, but that would soon change. This was mainly due to one man, Joseph Bonanno. He was the boss of the Bonanno family and wanted more power and money. There was only one problem in his way: the other bosses. Most bosses were happy with how things were run in the city. They had everything they needed and didn't want to risk it all in a gang war. But Bonanno wasn't like the others. He wanted more than what he had and wasn't afraid to use violence to get it. He wanted to control all of New York, and he believed that if he could eliminate the other bosses, he would become the most powerful mobster in the city. So he began to plan his attack. He wanted to take out 3 bosses at once, but he needed help from another family. One family in particular stood out: the Lucchese crime family. Their boss, Thomas E.G. Kelly, had been in prison for the last 12 years. That meant the family was being run by a commission, which made it easy for Bonanno to manipulate them. He offered them a deal they couldn't refuse. If they helped him take out the other bosses, they would be given full control of the city. The meeting was held in a small house in Philadelphia. It was old and run down, but it was perfect for what Bonanno had planned. Only 6 men attended the meeting, and it was there that the attack on the other bosses was planned. A few weeks later, Bonanno and his crew attacked. The Genovese boss was taken out first. Then the Colombo and Lucchese bosses were attacked. Both bosses survived, but the other members of the families weren't so lucky. Bonanno had proven that he was willing to do whatever it took to win, and now he was going after the remaining bosses. The attacks kept coming, and the bosses were forced to go into hiding. One by one, they were taken out, until only 2 bosses were left: Carlos Greco and Frank Thierry. They were the heads of the Bonanno and Genovese families respectively. They were close friends and had worked together for years. And now, they were the only bosses left standing. They met up in secret and decided they needed to do something before it was too late. They reached out to the other families in hopes of forming an alliance, but they refused. They didn't want to get involved in the conflict and instead chose to remain neutral. The 2 bosses were left with no choice but to declare war on Bonanno. It was a risky move, but they had no other options. The 2 families regrouped and launched a series of attacks against Bonanno's crew. It was a brutal war, and both sides suffered heavy losses. But as the war dragged on, it became clear that the Bonanno family was starting to lose. One by one, their soldiers were taken out until only a few were left. Bonanno knew that he needed to end the war before it was too late. He reached out to the bosses and offered them a deal. He was willing to give up his territory in exchange for his life. The offer was accepted, and the war came to an end. But not everyone was happy with the outcome. Many of Bonanno's soldiers felt that he had betrayed them and were determined to get revenge. One soldier in particular was on a mission. He had lost everything in the war and was determined to get it back. His name was Salvatore. He had been a made man in the Bonanno family for over 20 years. During that time, he had worked his way up to the position of capo mandamento. But when the war broke out, he had been taken out. He had been shot in the chest and left for dead. But he survived, and now he was looking for revenge. He reached out to the other families in hopes of getting their support, but they refused. They didn't want to get involved in the conflict and instead chose to remain neutral. So Salvatore was left with no choice but to go after Bonanno's family on his own. He knew that Bonanno was in hiding, but he didn't know where, so he started by attacking the family's businesses. He bombed restaurants, clubs, and even a school. He didn't care who he hurt, as long as it sent a message to Bonanno. Then he started to go after Bonanno's family members. He kidnapped his son and tortured him until he found out where his father was hiding. But Bonanno wasn't there. He'd gone into hiding again. Salvatore was furious. He had wasted time and resources and still hadn't found Bonanno. He knew he needed to come up with a new plan. He decided to go to Italy and find Bonanno there. He had heard that Bonanno had been visiting the country recently and figured that's where he would go. He arrived in Italy and began searching for Bonanno. He followed his every move, always staying just out of sight. He knew that if Bonanno saw him, he would be killed. But he was determined to get revenge. Finally, he got his chance. Bonanno was taking a walk around the Colosseum, and Salvatore decided to make his move. He approached Bonanno, and the two men stared at each other. For a moment, Salvatore knew this was his chance to get revenge, and he wasn't going to waste it. He pulled out a knife and lunged at Bonanno. The crowd gasped as they watched the scene unfold. Bonanno was taken to the hospital, but he didn't make it. Salvatore had finally gotten his revenge. He may have lost his fingers in the war, but he had won the ultimate victory. Now he can finally rest. After killing Bonanno, Salvatore returned to the United States. He turned himself into the police and told them everything he knew about the war. He hoped that they would understand what he had done and why, but they didn't. He was arrested and charged with murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, but he didn't mind. He had done what he had to do, and now he was willing to pay the price. The other families were furious with Salvatore. They didn't like that he had exposed their secrets to the police and were determined to punish him. They sent hitmen to the prison where he was being held, but they were unsuccessful. Salvatore had too much protection, and the hitmen were forced to leave empty-handed. The families tried to bribe the guards to get to Salvatore, but they also failed. Salvatore had made a lot of enemies during the war, and he knew that they would try to take him out. So he had been expecting this and had taken precautions. He had bribed the guards, and they were loyal to him. The families were furious with Salvatore, but there was nothing they could do. They couldn't get to him in prison, so they tried to intimidate his family. They sent threatening letters and even made death threats. But Salvatore's family didn't care. They knew that he had done what he had to do and was willing to pay the price. The families tried everything to get rid of Salvatore, but nothing worked. He was too well protected, and they couldn't get to him. Eventually, they gave up. They had lost, and there was nothing they could do about it. The blood war between the Bonanno and Genovese crime families was one of the most violent conflicts in organized crime history. It was a brutal war that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people. But it was also a war that had a lasting impact on the Mafia. The war led to the deaths of some of the most powerful mobsters in history, and it also led to the rise of new families. The Bonanno and Genovese families were never able to recover from the war, and they were eventually replaced by the Gambino and Lucchese families. Today, the Mafia is not what it once was. The families are weaker, and the government is much more aggressive in its prosecution of mobsters. But the Mafia is still around, and it still exists in New York. Today, the Bonanno and Genovese families are still technically at war. The two families have not spoken to each other in over 50 years, and they still consider each other enemies. The war between the two families is one of the longest-running feuds in organized crime history, and it's likely that the feud will continue for many years to come. Thanks for watching. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.